what exactly has happened in the last 100 years? In 1925, the world was just getting over the First World War. They weren't that many years away from the second one. Those would be the noteworthy worldly events, or events in the world. But there were other things that were taking place. As Pope Pius XI said, the secularism, naturalism is another way to look at it. Father Fahey, in the excerpt that I read, defined naturalism. It is a society that is devoid of the supernatural element. And obviously the supernatural element here is that of God. There are people in this country, especially, not just the United States, but certainly we'll use the U.S. as an example, that would be perfectly happy in living a life completely devoid of God and religion. They certainly want the government to run that way. There's no way that a government can run that way. And the simple example that I give, because they end up in contradiction. In other words, anybody who's promoting this idea of the lie of separation of church and state, first, they don't know what they're talking about, but anybody who's promoting this thinks that you can actually have a government completely devoid of God and completely secular. Well, the fact is that no government has ever existed like this, and no government can exist like this. Even the communist governments of China, and in the past that of Russia, Soviet Russia. You think, well, Father, they were totalitarian. They didn't allow people to practice religion publicly. That doesn't mean that they were devoid. They strove to eliminate God from society, but it can't be done. Even in the worst conditions, I mean, publicly it can be done, but in the hearts and minds of the individuals, you can be sure that in these places, and these are perhaps the two worst examples in the history of men, where governments strove to eliminate God. You can't. God is the creator of heaven and earth. God created all those people in these two countries, as well as other places around the world, where the rights of men were taken away, the ability of someone to publicly practice religion, particularly the Catholic faith, all that's stripped away. There are other things involved here, but you get the idea. Even in the midst of all of this, God still exists. God created these horrible leaders in these countries. So what do you have here? You have a situation where God is still present. Maybe it is not seen publicly, but he's still present. His kingship still exists even in the middle of all those years when Mao Zedong ruled China, when Lenin and Stalin ruled Russia. The kingship of Christ was still there. Now, the people in those countries were not allowed to publicly promote the idea, and if they did, they would have suffered some type of repercussions, because the communists wanted to eliminate all visible signs of faith and religion in their countries. But yet in the end, what do you find? You will have found individuals in those countries that continue to practice their faith, their religion. And I'm focusing particularly on Catholicism here. I remember reading a book. Oh my, this goes back every bit of 45 years ago. I think I was in my late teens when I read this book, With God in Russia. It was written by a Jesuit priest, Father Walter Shizek, and he was an American Jesuit who had been trained to go into Russia, and very quietly, obviously not in a cassock, and to do missionary work very quietly in Russia. They were trained to memorize the entire Mass. They couldn't use a missal. Say the entire Mass by memory, and in very private circumstances. So that's an example. And he wasn't the only one. There would have been others. Other priests who were trained to do just that. To go into Russia, to go into China, and to administer to the people who wanted to live their Catholicism, wanted to be able to go to Mass, even in the most dire of circumstances, and receive the sacraments, to be able to go to confession, to receive Holy Communion. You see from this the importance of his kingship. Even in the most difficult of circumstances, his kingship is there. That's an important point today.